Hello, everyone. This is Adlane Fellah, Chief Research Analyst at Maravedis Research. It's my great pleasure to have today Dayna Kully, special guest. I've been working very hard to get you folks the special guest. Dayna Kully is an authority in hospitality technology. She has many titles, but today we have invited her because of her current positions as a T100 leadership team, work group chair, T100 Innovation Subcommittee co-chair, HTNG advisor to Next Generation Infrastructure Subcommittee, and of course, Dayna, you have also your 5th Gen Wireless Consulting Group. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's a great pleasure as we, produce more and more content around hospitality connectivity. Now, I think the first question that comes to mind is, what is HTNG mission?
So, HTNG is really around leveraging the collective knowledge of hospitality technology leaders to address common challenges and to unlock business potential within the industry. And there are a lot of things that HTNG does. HTNG is now part of HLA, which is the American Hotel and Lodging Association. But, there's a lot around collaboration and partnership and next-gen systems. So there are a lot of angles to it. But really, it's to bring the best and the brightest together to move next-generation technology forward in hospitality.
Yeah. Obviously, technology is a very broad term here. What are your members' main technology pain points?
It's an interesting question because we actually are working through those right now. So the T100 has several subcommittees. They've got a hotelier subcommittee and a vendor subcommittee and an innovation team. And everybody has worked together to pull through the biggest industry challenges, the biggest problem statements. So I'm actually going to go through and tell you what those are because they're current. And there's 10 of them. And, they're not all maybe the same priority. But these are, when we all come together and look at the vendors and the hoteliers, these are the biggest challenges that we're trying to solve within HTNG. And some of them might not sound technology-based, but we're going to focus on the technology aspects of each of these. So the first one is actually workforce shortages, which goes well beyond technology workforce shortages, but that's a really, really big problem. So around getting things more efficient and helping people identify the best resources. Standardizing on security and data privacy in terms of maybe even coming up with an RFP type document, because it's really difficult for, I think, vendors to get their arms around what the hoteliers really want in terms of standards for privacy. And it's really important to get that right. AI governance, there's so much talk around AI, but the governance aspect of it, how do we make sure we're doing it right and we're not getting ourselves in trouble and there's some checks and balances around it. Next gen integrations is another one. Really, there are a lot of legacy systems out there. And in terms of integrations, there's a real desire to standardize. But as you know, there's also a big push for companies who are innovating to have their own integrations. And it makes it really challenging for the hoteliers when you've got 22 to 25 different integrations on any given property there's a lot of work and maintenance and development that has to happen. Prioritization around technology investment is another area that we're focused on because there's a lot of competition for dollars. So figuring out how to prioritize the technology investment. Another one is actually around the complexity of this market in terms of decision making, because you've got owners, you've got franchisees, you've got management companies, and they all have a role to play. So what's the magic formula there in terms of how do you get through all that and it's make next-gen technology come to fruition, which kind of rolls into the next one, which is redefining the vendor-hotelier relationship. It's a partnership, especially with next-gen technology. It's not, you're not buying widgets anymore. It's a lot more complex. This one comes up a lot, managing guest identity. There's digital identity, when you check into a hotel and figuring out how to get that right. But there's also, it's very difficult because when you go into any of these hotel systems, one individual might have an identity that's 15 different identities. even if you're a loyalty member. And particularly as you get into the more complex international names that aren't have naming conventions that are a little bit different, it's really a complex topic. So mastering the guest identity is something that everybody's been working on. It's a big challenge. And then I think actually realizing the personalization aspect for the guest around hospitality because of such disparate data systems, it's been really, really difficult. So I know that's a long list, but those are the kind of issues. Hopefully that gives you a sense of the kind of issues that HTNG is working on.
Yeah, I mean, it does. And from the outside, it seems very complex because you mentioned in the different stakeholders, the brands, the operators, the owners. It's at least from the outside, it seems quite
It is.
complicated to
It is complicated.
understand
That's what
besides
makes it
what.
really, really difficult.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to our video interviews and content with industry shakers. I just want to share quickly because we get a lot of people asking, how can we work with Maravedis and what do you guys do? So besides the actual research reports, we have three ways you can work with us, from marketing essentials to marketing pro and custom projects. So Marketing Essential is basically a marketing program for startups, for small companies with limited budgets and limited experience and resources, where we can help them maintain a constant flow of content through our content engine. We hear very often, I want to do this blog, but I forgot about it. I don't have time. I don't have any ideas what to write about. I don't know what to tell, how to say it. I'm just too busy, etc. So, the program starts at $5,000 and provides you with a number of deliverables and outputs that we can agree on together. Those are 6 to 12 months agreements. For more sophisticated, larger organizations, we have Marketing Pro, where we can have everything that's included in the Marketing Essentials and add to it some of the strategic marketing aspects such as positioning, reviewing sales pitch deck, etc. So we work very closely with both your product managers and your sales team. With the product managers, because we really want to understand your technology stack very well so we can talk intelligently about it. And with your BDM and sales folks to understand, and where the friction comes from, how we can reduce the sales cycle, which tend to be very long with ISPs, and really help them nurture their leads and be much more effective in their work. And then finally, we have custom projects where we can look at a particular project that you have in mind. That usually those are sizable projects, and again, every customer is different. So yeah, talk to us. Okay. So how do you prioritize then between all these 10 initiatives?
So that gets done, I think, internally by the various teams and the leadership. But the way HTNG works is they take all of these problems and they look at what is the best way to solve them and what's the best way to address the issues. And they do this in a number of different ways. I always call the work groups, which is one of the channels to solve the problems, actual work groups. And these, sometimes technical standards come out of them, sometimes guidelines come out of them, and sometimes it's for education because the hospitality industry needs to be brought up to speed on an emerging technology. But the work groups I like to call the lifeline of HTNG because really when you get the hoteliers and the vendors working together and the consultant communities working together on solving the problems, it's effective. So that is really kind of the most common way that HTNG addresses this, with a formal charter and a formal work group with objectives and timelines and timeframes to get through. And some of these problems we'll never actually solve, but we'll find a way to address them that's most efficient and we'll stay on top of it. The other thing is, sometimes it merits education, like I mentioned. So there's webinars, seminars, bringing people in from the outside industries that may or may not be adjacent to learn more about the technology and how to solve the problem. So there are a couple different ways to do it. We also have what we call communities of interest around certain topics, but we also have, because it's a global organization, HTNG, even though it's owned by HNLA, which focuses on the US, there are communities of interest in APAC and there's a community of interest in EMEA, because we need to make sure that we're recognizing the needs of hospitality globally, because all of the hotel brands, for the most part, are global.
Yeah.
And there are different requirements and standards and legislation around all those problem statements between APAC and EMEA and the Middle East and the US. So that's really how things get worked. And what'll come out of all of the work we're doing on these problem statements is work groups, webinars, white papers, and you'll start hearing more about those.
Okay. Have you seen, since you mentioned regional differences, have you seen some notable differences that have been
Well,
surprised?
GDPR is an example.
Okay.
Like you've got, privacy standards in one part of the world, but they impact the rest of the world. And so, you've got data that has to be stored in certain parts of the world in a certain way that isn't applicable in other parts of the world. So you've got to be able to address all of these nuances, and it's hard to do. You have to, one, stay on top of them and, be aware of them, but two, you've got to come up with a solution, even though it might seem like a niche market. It's a requirement by a particular country.
Okay.
So those are the kind of things that we see.
All right, let's dive into AI-driven initiatives. AI is a big topic. You did mention some references to AI earlier. What do you want to share?
It's interesting, AI comes up in absolutely every conversation with every technology. And I think we all know it's kind of become a buzzword.
Yeah.
Right? If you don't talk about AI, it's sort of surprising. So it underlies all the HTNG initiatives. There will be an AI component or an AI discussion. What I would say is, while it's always top of mind and discussed, there's no current AI initiative being worked. We've had work groups. It's been a challenge because they're so broad. You really have to focus on something that's manageable, which has sort of been hard to get our arms around. But we have had work groups and we have had communities of interest. But I think the key is sort of identifying exactly where it's the most useful and the governance aspect of it. So how do you manage it efficiently? And so, because there are risks, right? But you need that oversight. So those are the kind of things that we're, I think, working on: the security aspect, that the accuracy of the data inputs, where you get them. And so it's a huge topic, but one that is really hard to get your arms around. So it's just a constant conversation. And it came up in the problem statements too, right? In terms of one of the main things that we're working on.
Yeah, I realized it's a moving target, which a limited number of use cases. Let's talk about the convergence between Wi-Fi and cellular. Now, back a few years ago, I did a report on CBRS. We looked at how CBRS could potentially be required in hotels. But what's the situation today?
It's interesting because, of course, this is the topic that's near and dear to our heart. And even, gosh, I was looking back, I would say in 2016, 17, we had a couple work groups around, edge compute and 5G. And you hear these conversations, and this is pretty typical. When 5G came out, the hoteliers were like, oh, we can finally get rid of Wi-Fi. It's going to solve all the world's problems. And as we know, it doesn't penetrate in building really well. So, and there's all kinds of different flavors of 5G and what makes sense. And it doesn't necessarily make sense in building today. For hoteliers, they've got really big investments in Wi-Fi. So what you want to do is optimize that connectivity and make sure that the convergence is coming in the right place at the right time. And part of that is making sure that the decisions that hoteliers are making are around getting Wi-Fi that will be able to converge with cellular, getting to, 6E, for example, so that when 5G is robust enough and there are business agreements in place, you will be able to have that convergence. So those are the kind of conversations that we have because you want to plan for that. You don't want to be stuck, unable to converge. So there are
What the conversions for? I mean, what's the purpose of conversions in the context of hospitality? Is it to enable more secure communications for staff? Is it to
I
connect
think it's,
OS?
well, so you've got staff and you've got guests. So today it's both. It's, I mean, Wi-Fi is not by nature secure.
I
So,
wouldn't agree with you there, but we can have a conversation that the air interface is exactly the same as 3GPP cellular.
well, it depends where you are, what version of Wi-Fi you have, right?
Well, I mean, from Wi-Fi 5 all the way up, it's still WPA2, WPA3. And this is a recurring
Theme.
theme that I
Yeah.
see. And I asked, both the Wi-Fi Alliance and IEEE, their response, which I'll be happy to send you after this call. But I think there is a misconception out there where the difference is that the number of types of deployments for Wi-Fi is much wider. So you have pre-shared keys and and some security vulnerabilities on the authentication side, not on the air interface, which is correct. But I mean, we can.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother subject, but I mean, a lot of these networks are really old.
Okay,
That's the problem. And so they might not have what's required implemented. You don't have pre-shared keys in hospitality like you do in MDU
right,
because you have people checking in for a day or two or an average
right.
of 2.3 days. So there are a lot of nuances. And I think that's one of the things is getting a more secure, a more robust implementation of Wi-Fi
Mhm.
and a current implementation so that it can integrate and be seamless really for the guests. Because today, for example, if you do something like Wi-Fi calling, it's not always easy to go indoors, outdoors, and those sorts of things. So it's a big topic, and it's one that I think we'll see in the next generation infrastructure community of interest. I think we'll see this being discussed more and more. That community of interest sort of started off as physical infrastructure and has morphed more into getting educated on private 5G and CBRS and some of these convergence opportunities. So maybe we should have you come in and do a talk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, and this topic of security comes up a lot. So I'll be happy to share some resources and do some fact checking here. But let's perhaps move on to the next topic here, which is, if you had a magic wand to solve tech issues, what would that be?
Well, first it would be to have unlimited budget to solve the tech issues. And then really the challenges that I articulated, the problem statements I articulated, in the first 10 minutes of our conversation are really where I'd wave the magic wand to get those resolved first. And there just isn't I mean, I wish there was a magic wand, but I mean, I think safety and security in all of the hospitality architectures would be where we would start. And then the guest identity and the personalization. I mean, we've been talking about those for 10 years and we've never been able to bring them to fruition because it's really hard to get everybody on the same level playing field in terms of the technology and getting the data all in one place where you can actually leverage it.
Okay, excellent. Final question, what's your vision for hospitality 10 years from now?
I think we're finally moving toward a persistent identity framework for guests, which will make a big difference. I mean, a common language, decentralized identity for all of the hotels and the whole travel journey because it's so disconnected. You need to be able to have communication and recognition throughout the entire journey. And you can only do that if you've got your identity consistentized and it's persistent for the guest and for the actual physical building or airplane or whatever the case may
Okay.
be. So I think to deliver on what guests really want is a truly personalized experience. The identity piece has to be worked out first. So I think in the next 10 years, I actually think that's going to happen. There's some really, really good work being done on that, and I think so many of the systems are partially in the cloud, but not fully in the cloud. And it's really been difficult to manage. There's there's a lot of underlying hotel systems today that are 30 and 40 years old. And most of the brands are actually moving them to the cloud, but it's a 5+ year process when you've got 5,000, 7,000 hotels. And then I think adding the AI to add value and maybe identify bad actors in the space and eliminate them will be, there'll be some efficiencies to take advantage of with AI. So there's a lot of technology today that is being uncovered and tested that I think in 10 years we're going to see it reach a much more mature level and be able to bring advantages to hospitality and the entire guest journey. Things aren't necessarily easy for the guests today in terms of being flawless and smooth. There's a lot of requirements, and guests do not want 1,000 apps. They want to be able to have it sort of be intuitive. So at least that's my hope. It may be a bit of a pipe dream, but
I want maybe just to touch on the final point. When you mentioned identity, is this something that the open roaming from the Wireless Broadband Alliance can help with in terms of their pass point being deployed and across a variety of networks?
We're big supporters of Passport, and HTNG has implemented Passport in conjunction with WBA in a number of their meetings. And I think the challenge is we've never been able to get past a release 1 because Apple has been steadfast in only going to release 1, and there's a lot of functionality that needs to happen in release 2 and 3. So I don't know that there's been great progress there, but something like that is exactly what we're looking at. I mean, that would make life so much easier. I mean, and even being able to eliminate things like neutral host systems, right? By having that kind of convergence with Wi-Fi and cellular, which you can do in a Passport environment, but you can't do it with just carrier-based Passport. It's got to be enterprise.
Okay.
So there's some challenges, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Exactly. So I think we have covered a lot of topics today. I really want to thank you, Dayna, for sharing your insights, and hopefully the audience is going to appreciate how much great content there is. And you guys have a flagship event coming up soon in Philadelphia, if I'm not mistaken, in August.
Yeah, it's a small event. It's really to focus on the work groups. I mean, I think, this is an unusual one. We're bringing back an event that used to be a regular event with HTNG called the Insight Summit, and this is the first attempt to bring it back. So this is the work groups actually getting together and getting work done face to face, and then there will be some leadership that comes in and talks about their vision, but it'll be, it's a members only event. One of the things I will say that all the communities of interest, EMEA, APAC, next gen infrastructure, those are actually open to non-members, which is not well publicized, but if any of this is interesting to people, they can jump in and start sort of learning what the value is of HTNG by joining some of these.
Yeah, I did participate to one of recent one, and I found it very valuable. So thank you again for sharing, and thanks for, and until the next episode. Thank you.
You're welcome.